And good to have you tonight with us here on PM Express with me, Blessed Sugan. What a relief for many who had the discomfort of going through government's domestic debt exchange. Arguably the most controversial fiscal policy that was undertaken by the erstwhile NPP Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo administration up to the point of the elections. But now the John Mahama administration is taking over this burden and has finally communicated what it intends to do with the domestic debt exchange program. And that's why tonight we're assessing government's broad plan in terms of settlement of these outstanding debts. Let's take a look at the directive coming through tonight from the presidency. If you haven't heard about it, John Mahama once again in the news, the president announcing that the Ministry of Finance has today, and it's been confirmed through a statement signed by Minister in charge of Government and Communications, that as of February 17th, 2025, government is now honored payment in cash of coupons to all domestic debt exchange program bondholders. Some great news, correct? Let's dig into the figures. So far, DDEP coupons honored so far, according to the statement coming through from the presidency, is amounting to a little over 6 billion Ghana cedis. But government has some more way to go because there are two phases of the domestic debt exchange, not necessarily domestic, but in terms of our debt restructuring, broadly speaking, which I'll be getting into shortly. But pay attention to this figure because this is the amount honored in terms of the new arrangements going forward and the broad plan the government has. It is going back way into the erstwhile John Mahama administration one plan, where of course they used to have what was called the sinking fund, a broad scheme at the time brought up by the former finance minister, now presidential advisor on finance, the Honorable Seth Tekpe, announcing this broad plan of having a sinking fund that would of course hedge the country. We could rely on it anytime we want to deal with issues of clearance of debt. And personally, I think that this is why government is going back, revisiting its notes and trying as much as possible that it could, at least for now, rely on that strategy, at least in the interim, as they work out a strategy in dealing with the matters. And that's why this 9.7 billion cedis that we're speaking of will be crucial going forward into the future, because this will inform the way forward as to what the strategy will be for government in turning around this fund and making sure that by the next settlement date, government is indeed aligned. Because look at it, they just have a couple of months away from now to honor the next phase of the DDEP. Take a look at it, July and August 2025. So roughly in the next 3 to 4 months, government ought to be looking for the next fund. And that's why this piece of mechanism that government is putting up with the 9.7 billion sinking fund will be crucial in deciding the fate of those who will be due by July and August of 2025. I want you to take a look at this because I was talking about what's happening in terms of our debt situation, right? The domestic one, well, might be the easy way out, but government indeed has a bigger challenge to deal with what's been happening on the international market. We shut out of the market, a reason for which we're going for the 3 billion package from the International Monetary Fund, correct? Okay, so this is our journey so far and how we've been faring on the international markets. Obviously, in terms of what's going to be accruing for us, in just say about the next 10 years, we'll be shooting all the way to about 1 billion if we do not act fast in perhaps trying to avert what might happen in the next 10 years. 1 billion in terms of US dollars commitments that government ought to meet in the next 10 years as part of the sovereign debt exchange program that we've done through the Eurobond system. And this is painting you that picture of what's been happening ever since. We've been there before, of course, similar to what happened in 2023. Then the figures are now shooting up because of the commitments that we have to be honoring this year alone, which is way higher in what will be happening in the next 10 years. So don't just be looking at the future. Of course, you need to pay attention to what's even happening now. It's as high as the next 10 years because we are due this year in trying as much as possible to deal with the outstanding debts that we have to settle. 1.3 billion US dollars is what will be honored. Government ought to look for that fund. And even as we progress further into the next few years, 2027, 2028, another set of it will come, and then it keeps piling onto the next 10-year framework that you see will be back, similar to the same trend as of now 2025. Is the reason for which once again, some of these mechanisms, the sinking fund, well, it's not enough, clearly looking at the commitments that we even have outside the country. But this amount definitely will be enough in terms of talking about what is done to the first phase of these groups, that's the DDEP coupons, and what it will be doing for the next phase that will be due in July and August of 2025. And that's the news coming through. At least we don't know what the strategy will do in terms of its impact, because there are people who are still reeling under the effects of the domestic debt exchange program. And that's why today or tonight we've assembled all of them for you to find out how the impact has been, what they make of government's own settlement plan, and what their own assessment will be. We'll get into the matters. Be my guest here on PM Express. I am Blessed Sugan. PM Express, as always, is brought to you by Syntex Tank. It's also brought to you by Pepsodent Cavity Fighter and Academic Times. When we get back, we get to hear about the stories and how people are now adjusting to this new broad plan to settle the domestic debt. Please stay. Pleasure always being with you here on PM Express, and we're being supported proudly by Syntex Tank. It is strong, it is tough, Academic Times, and also the Pepsodent Cavity Fighter toothpaste. And don't forget that there's a lot on offer for you if you always want a tank that you can rely on. Your option should be Syntex Tank. The Academic Times Journal is also launching soon with 3 distinctive graphic publications and also journals to showcase and empower students across all educational levels, and you need to be on the lookout for that. So always make sure that you're reaching out to the Academic Times Journal, and don't forget as well that you can always get in touch with them and find out more. Pepsodent Cavity Fighter is also supporting us proudly, and every time we eat, we know that the food particles are trapped in between our teeth, leading to some tooth decay. And this is the time for you to perhaps rely on Pepsodent Cavity Fighter. And of course, every morning, every night, that should be your companion. And grateful that you're spending time with us tonight on PM Express. And why don't we get to it? Government's announcements coming through in the last few hours, communicating what the broad plan is towards settling the domestic debt arrears. And based on the memorandum and the statement released from the presidency, it is now clear that some 6 billion cedis is being released to the bondholders. So how are they feeling about this, and what will be the impact going forward? Grateful to be joined now by Dr. Edu Anani Entry, who is the convener, Pensioner Bondholders Forum, and past director of the Securities and Exchange Commission. Dr. Sharif Mahmood Khalid is the Economic Policy Advisor at the Office of the Vice President. And we have Professor Lord Mensah, who is joining us from the Finance and Economic Department at the University of Ghana. Thank you all for spending some time with us tonight. Obviously, a great sigh of relief for you, Dr. Anani, knowing that, of course, this is the fight you've kept up all throughout last year, yet it yielded no results. Of course, you were at the Finance Ministry for days together with those who were retirees as well, pensioner bondholders, who were just seeking to secure a memorandum with the government. The funds didn't come through last year. At least government is communicating its plan now. They've released some amounts, clearly indicating what they'll be doing in the coming months. What's your initial reaction to this announcement, sir?
Well, thank you. Let me make a clarification. The funds that we were expecting, even though it kept long, when we were picketing for arrears that wasn't paid from February. You know, the settlement date was February, I think February 17th or so. At that time, we needed to get our monies. In terms of the interest that were due. But the government had some issues with reconciliation, so it took some time. So by July, when we finally stopped our picketing, the payment has started and has continued to be honored up to now. That is for people who did not exchange their bonds, especially the pensioners and also other individuals who did not exchange their bonds. But for those who exchanged their bonds, the settlement date was 17th February, and therefore it meant that by 6 months' time, which was August, their first coupon payment was due, and that was settled. That becomes a bigger amount because for those who didn't submit their or tender in their bonds, it's just a small amount every week. But for those who tender in their bonds and got exchanged, every one of them coupon was supposed to be paid on a single day. That is 6 months, 6 months, 6 months. So the first 6 months, August, and the second 6 months was February last year. The third one was August last year. And this year, February, is the fourth one. So all the first, second, third has been paid. That was paid during the SY government's period. For this new government, this is the first time that they are going to pay. That is February. And so it's not that some monies has been locked up or kept unpaid and is now going to be paid. No. It is a process of paying every 6 months. And their first payment is now due this month. And that is what the government did.
It's the issue about commitments, which was not forthcoming, a reason for which many of you were picketing at the time.
Yes, that's why we picketed. But I'm saying when the bonds, when the payment started,
at least then you had the pathway. Yes, government is tonight, referring to the memorandum they had with you. Are they really working with that memo?
Yes, the memorandum. If you ask government is fair, that is true. Coupons are paid every 6 months. So once the settlement date was February, the next coupon date, the first coupon date payment was August, and then another February, another August, and now another February. So that is in line with the memorandum that of the exchange. Once you got the settlement date sorted out, every 6 months the coupon is due. So this is the fourth 6 months that the coupon is going to be due and must be paid.
Is this a good omen for you, many of your members who have been worried, wondering what the political transition would mean to your members who are not sure, uncertain about the future? What does this, spell to them?
Well, you are right. Sometimes people think that another government can come and change things. But I have assured them that this is a contract you have with your clients. And then again, you see, when government goes into such a problem, the only thing government must do is to ensure that it does its things right to gain the acceptability of investors investing with you. So once you have gone through that, you have to make sure that you don't default. And once you keep on honoring your coupons, this thing hasn't come. Those who didn't tender in, some of their maturity has been, some of the bonds has matured already and has been paid. But those who tender in, maturity hasn't come. It's for the first 4 years. So it will be next 2 years that 50% of the bonds held by individuals will become due for payment. And government must do all that it can to ensure that when the payment comes, now that you are honoring the coupons regularly, the same thing must happen when the principal is up for payment.
I see.
That is what will bring you the confidence that people will say, well, you are doing well. So if we want to go back to the market will accept you to come and issue bonds.
Interesting. And of course, let's hear from Dr. Khalid, because you work with the governing side. Many are commending you, and as of now, the political capital is growing for you on this matter. But some say this is a pure case of legality. The memo ought to be respected, and so you had no choice but to do what you're doing now. What do you say to such persons who say it didn't take much for the NDC administration to release the funds now?
Well, I mean, thank you very much. Historically, if you look at this, before the domestic debt exchange, government had a contract with bondholders, which they reneged on which resulted in the domestic debt exchange program. So I think the cover of legality is neither here nor there, but the commitment to stability of the economy is what we should be speaking to. What you realize is that what the government has done is it has been consistent in actually holding on to the commitment of the domestic debt exchange. And this was heralded in the vetting of the finance minister, moved on to the announcement of that to that effect by the president, and now culminating in this announcement. So the level of coordination and effort being put at this only tells you the commitment level of government in actually giving that stability. You would see that where government is not able to offer cash payments, it's actually offering a kind payment. All of these are real commitment and activation of the sinking fund. So these are all real commitments that have been activated to actually ensure that this obligation is met. Yes, there could be legal contracts here and there, but an obligation to legal contracts in and of itself within the financial landscape and atmosphere is by way of injecting confidence in and of itself to the economy. And that's exactly what the government is doing.
But the sinking fund itself and the strategy you're using now is being questioned, isn't it? Because is it sufficient? 9.7 billion we're dealing with as of now. How is that going to be turned around?
Well, it's not the case of sufficiency.
Looking at the commitments that way ahead of you. You have July, you have August timelines to meet.
Yes, but at the moment, what is available to the government in terms of legal payments is what has been activated. And mind you, all of it has been paid for the period due. And the sinking fund has been activated in anticipation of what is yet to come.
So you believe it's more about leadership? Some say it's normal. Payments are always made.
I mean, if it was normal, we wouldn't be here in the first place. There wouldn't be a domestic debt exchange. Why is there?
You're taking some political credits for this, isn't it?
Obviously, there ought to be some credit. I don't know if you want to label it political, but there's responsibility here, there's commitment here, there's resilience here, and there's an injection of confidence into the economy, and that's what we're looking at.
There's the broader conversation about, the sovereign debt, and perhaps we also ought to be mindful about what's happening externally. I'll come back to you, Doc, on that. But let's also hear from Professor Lord Mensah, who's with us. Prof, the point now about government strategy, the sinking fund, that's what they're relying on in terms of the way forward, and in terms of honoring the commitments that may be coming in the next few months. Do you feel that that alone is sufficient, or perhaps some more ingenuity will be required?
Yeah, well, I think we need to appreciate, the fact that sinking fund is a protective, mechanism as far as, bond obligations are concerned. The sinking fund is to protect the investor. It gives an assurance that, come what may, going forward, government is ready to, pay its debt obligations as they are due. So from where I sit, it gives investor confidence. And if any investor is sitting out there thinking what is likely to happen in the next 7 months, he knows that obviously there is, a sinking fund. So it's more or less a protective, mechanism for a counterparty when there is, bond kind of agreement between investors and then, government, or an issuer and then a bondholder. But then we need to appreciate that whatever it may be, it has to do with consistency. Obviously, as Dr. Anane has indicated, investors were thinking about, possibly after transition, what is likely to happen. And once, government has appreciated that, it's an obligation between government and investors, and there's a continuity in payment, it goes a long way to build confidence. And I think, and I will not be surprised to see government coming on the local market to start, issuing, some medium-term bonds, because the economy needs, medium to long-term bonds. We cannot, continuously rely on, short-term bonds, short-term instruments like the money market, treasury bills, which are being oversubscribed, and government rejecting them here and there, which is also a good signal. So from where I sit, it's a way of, bringing back investor confidence. And
For me, the government is doing well on that when it comes to.
I want us to
the
be guided by
sinking fund provision.
right. I want us to be guided by history and to move into that next phase of the conversation. I'll start off with you again, Prof. Since you're on with us. The point about what's happened in the past to the sinking fund, it's not as though government can't dip its hands into that fund and completely dissolve it or perhaps take away the funds. So if you're saying it's an indication, a signal of goodwill to the investor community, how do they trust the process?
Yeah, well, it depends on the administration of the day and the issue of the day. We need to appreciate that administration differs and how they treat investors also matter. If you're looking at an administration which is aggressively out there, not necessarily much giving attention to investors when it comes to, domestic debt restructuring and all those, obviously you expect that, hands will be dipped into, the sinking fund. But then it has to do with respect that you have for the investor community. We need to appreciate that, government need investors, and then the investors also needs, government for their investment. And so it's a matter of respecting the contract that you have with, the investor community, and thereby the assurance that you are giving them by providing a sinking fund. I was not expecting that any government, agent will dip his hands in the sinking fund. So it's a protective mechanism, and it needs to be respected. It's part of the contract, and once it was part of the contract, I wasn't expecting any government to dip its hands into it. But it's unfortunate it happened like that. But going forward, let's see how this government will protect, the sinking fund. It's very, very important for investor confidence, and so we need it.
That's moving me right to Dr. Khalid. The appetite very often for governments is that you want to spend and spend some more. So yes, you could come up with the news that yes, there's some 9.7 billion accruing in that fund, and yet go ahead to deplete it.
No, I mean, what you realize is that I think there's a wrong terminology being used here as far as the sinking fund is concerned. It's not government dipping its hands into the sinking fund. What you realize is that the real essence of the sinking fund has been activated. It's actually an insurance measure as by way of stimulating investor confidence. And that's exactly what the government is doing here. And that's its right usage as far as the sinking fund and its mandate is concerned. So having corrected that impression, you also realize that it's just not a one-off activity as by pay or by way of repaying this domestic debt exchange program when it's due. You'll see that several efforts have been put in place. Ministries have been shrunk, brought by 22 ministries. A lot has been done in terms of government expenditure. You've seen the president issuing that certain classes as far as long-haul travels are concerned ought to be considered as far as cost components are concerned. So you see a certain tightening at the level of governance. And when that happens, private sector tends to appreciate what government in and of itself is doing because it's leading the way. So these are all just not one-off activities or difference. There is a vast or gamut of activities being put out there by the government to actually, as it may, harness the confidence of the people and board the economy to get it back to stability levels.
What's government's own projection in terms of, how the markets will get back to its normalcy? Yes, there's another phase to it, the external exchange, but looking at what's happening domestically, Prof is talking about regaining, confidence in the investor community. But what's your own projection as government on this?
I mean, well, if you look at this, the projection or all of the build up to this is leading up to the budget, right? The budget is going to be the real essence of, or it's going to be the icing on the cake as far as any projection is concerned. So let's give it up to March. You'd see the budget being read, or once the budget is presented before Parliament, we can begin to talk about these tangibles that you're talking about in terms of gauging the expectation. But as you could see, the economy would begin to, the first quarter would be, you begin to see some signs. Second quarter would be there in the third quarter. But it's early days now to start to say this is what it is. But the real expectations are all a build-up to the budget read.
Dr. Anani, you know a bit more about the securities side. Of course, looking at what government is doing now, given the fact that you've been at the Securities and Exchange Commission and now working with the Pensioner Bondholders Forum, you kind of have a sense of how the markets will react to this, because these are the same categories of people who have the money, who have the capital. How do you feel they are going to be reacting to this? Dr. Anani, I hope you can hear me.
I think it's up now.
Yeah, so we can hear you, Dr. Anani. Okay. We lost you, Dr. Anani, there briefly. But Prof, maybe you can come in on that point for me. The point about how the markets will react to this, these same categories of people who had, quite a, not a fair, experience back then. But Prof, I'll come to you shortly. Dr. Anani is back on with us. Dr. Anani, I was just asking about your experience, knowing that you've been with the Securities and Exchange Commission. You've also worked with the bondholders who still have the money to put back into the economy. How do you feel they'll be reacting to all of this?
Well, as I said, when government go into such situation, the only thing governments do is to ensure that they will handle their finances well, to ensure that they will be able to service their debts, pay investors as and when it's due, to build back the confidence in the market, because investors has been hurt. And so if you keep on doing the right things and meeting your commitment, then people would have the confidence in you that if you come back this time to the market to seek for funds, people will be ready to give you funds. And that is why it is important that you make sure that you are always prepared, or you are ready to do the payments. And so if, for example, the government is able to do this sinking fund, which in some cases, if it was a private organization, people would have put it as part of the terms of the bond, that you must create a sinking fund. And if you have trustees, the trustees will ensure that consistently pay.
Dr. Anani, are you still there with us? Okay, we seem to have lost Dr. Anani there. Prof, you could just take it up from that point as to how the market it will be receiving all of these signals.
So, very well. We need to appreciate the investor, community, and then understands the alternatives of investment that the investor community has. We live in a country where the alternatives are quite limited, and let me be blunt on that. If it's not limited, Dr. Anani keeps on talking about the investor being hurt and all those, but we see the same investors chasing government, money market instrument, and to the extent that yesterday we had the finance minister rejecting excess, biddings on money market instrument, and so from where I sit, it's like the investor has no alternative. So the little that government will do, especially establishing, something like sinking fund and giving assurance that the sinking fund will indeed be protected, because it's more or less kind of an insurance mechanism to, the bondholder or the debt holder. So from where I sit, the investor community has a limited space to invest. And so the little that government will do, they will appreciate and then bounce back to the bond market. So gradually we'll see, some confidence being, built up, on the bond market that we see now.
And you know the science of it and how this thing works in terms of what's likely to happen in the next few days. How would you, what factors would you want government to pay attention to in terms of consolidating perhaps the trajectory that's been started? We're being told now that at least it's not new, but if it's a good sign that you're talking about, what factors would government need to pay attention to?
I think the market thrives on information and government about being transparent. And then these issues of, excessive spending here and there. If we don't see that, then obviously we're going to see the investor community, building up their confidence again. So it has to do with information and government being transparent enough to communicate, exactly what is happening in the investment space to the people of Ghana and then the entire investor, community, so that, they will be at par. Because if it turns up that information is, not symmetric when it comes to government operations, here and there, things being hidden, and then scandals upon scandals being, shown up here and there, obviously, it will weigh down the investor community again. So, the way they have started, consistency is very, very important. And I don't want to be tempted to say that because we are under an IMF program, that is why we seem to be on track. But a situation where we exit the IMF program, then our actual, management skills comes in, and then we try to, overspend here and there. So, hopefully,
at least the president has been touching on that, indicating that we tend to stay the course. And even
I'm happy that the president has announced he wants to own the economy. Not necessarily, extending the IMF program, and that is very, very important. It shows that he's ready to work and be on his own, and whatever austere measures, he intends to lay hands on will start from government. And we've seen that because the announcement that, government officials are not supposed to travel on first class and all those are all part of the austere measures which are started at the corridors of government. In one way or the other, it beat down expenditure. And, if government is not ready to spend, it builds up into, confidence that the investor community will have. So it's a good signal. And I believe that it will continue that way. And that is all we need from the government.
The elephant in the room, and Dr. Khalid, I want to point you to it, the IMF conditionality. And what would happen to the future of the Eurobond market? We've just done the projections, and you can see clearly that perhaps that's where the bigger challenge is. The domestic debt exchange might just be a minute part of the economic recovery plan.
Yeah. You could see that, a few months ago or a few weeks ago, we did have an engagement with the Paris Club, which encompasses most of this. So there's a plan ahead of that. There's a roadmap. And when we get to that, we're going to honor all of that. So we haven't really sat in isolation. We've engaged both external and internal. But as you would see, stemming off from where Professor Lord Mensah left over, you'd see that we're just, and to assure Professor Lord Mensah and many others listening that we're just not having a tick box exercise as far as an IMF program is concerned. If you look at budget cuts at the presidency, asking ministers and government appointees not to fly first class is not an IMF conditionality. If you look at the government committed to shrinking ministries and chopping some of them off, it's not an IMF conditionality. So you'd see ingenuity of a government in and of itself striving as best as it can to, as it may, create a buoyant space for the existence or a thriving of a decent economy, and that's exactly what we do.
So Dr. Khalid, Dr. Khalid, hold on for me, please.
Yes, Prof, go ahead.
That may not be, IMF specific, conditionality.
Right.
Yeah.
But then it forms part of, expenditure rationalization, and then, expenditure cuts, and they are all part of the IMF umbrella, conditionality.
But what I'm just saying is that
let's keep it as such.
Yeah, to keep it broader and transparent, Lord Mensah, what I'm just explicitly saying is that there is an explicit IMF conditionality to follow, right? What has been done and what we are seeing now is an ingenuity of a government which ought to be, as it may, commended as well, which we are all trying to do now.
Yeah, but my biggest challenge is, and perhaps I'm just holding brief for thousands of bondholders out there who would say, we don't trust you, the politicians.
What else do you want us to do now? Because we are talking about trust issues.
The NDC obviously is just taking over, so you would want some goodwill, obviously, but can we really trust you, the politicians?
The trust is what we're giving you. And I believe that most of you are seeing a certain respite in the economy. You're seeing a certain appreciation in the economy. You're seeing currency appreciation, among other issues. And this is the real trust that we are putting out to the good people of Ghana to appreciate that we are committed actually to delivering a healthy economy in the long term. These are short-term measures taken. Some long-term measures are going to come in due cost as the finance minister will be announcing. And as you'd see, it's early days yet, but the budget will be reflective of most of these and anchor a long-term vision for the year coming ahead.
But Dr. Anani, let's get to the aspect about reforms, because that will be very critical going forward. Reforms, yes, we do need them because in the erstwhile administration, of course, this broad plan about the fiscal responsibility and making sure that government does not spend beyond a certain threshold was the order of the day. Yet, because of the exigencies, government could not keep up. What form of reforms would you want to see going forward, so as to keep up and to ensure that there's trust in the markets? Dr. Anani, I hope you can still hear me. And kindly unmute as you make the point, sir.
As I was saying, I say when the government goes into this situation, the solution is to ensure that you are handling your debt obligations very, very, very well. Once you do that, then you can bring back investors' confidence in you. So once we have passed that side, the only thing we have to do is to consistently ensure that when payment is due, it is paid. And that is why when you go through this sinking fund, it's so good to do that. And I was saying that it's not popular here, but in some jurisdictions, the investors would ensure that you have a sinking fund as part of the condition for which they will give you their money. And there are trustees who
I think the Eurobond investors always ensure that the sinking
but the
fund.
local ones, we don't.
See, I mentioned disrespect.
Comply with the conditions of the sinking fund. So if you have to pay in money, they will ensure that you pay it.
Yeah, Prof, you are making a point quickly before I get back to
you. So you see, the entire bond concept is about contract and respecting the contract. And at the end of the day, if it turns up that a counterparty is not respecting the contract, that is where we can have problems like, a government trying to dip its hands in a sinking fund that is supposed to be part of a contract. So from where I sit, I think it's a contract. And once there's a sinking fund and there's respect coming from both sides of the agreement, I don't think any meaningful or a government who understands business, would dip its hands in sinking funds.
Prof, I'll come back to you on the reforms. But Dr. Anani, one more time, the issue you were raising about learning from best practices. If you could just be more elaborate on that point. Okay, we lost him there. But Prof, perhaps you can just continue from the learning from best experiences. You're pointing to the Eurobond market and what happens.
So learning from best experience, I can tell you that once a contract has been set up and counterparties agree on, as far as the bond market is concerned, no, party should renege on any of the agreements, at the middle of the contract. I mean, until maturity, nothing should happen. That all coupons that are supposed to be agreed on and then principals that are supposed to be paid are paid. There's no way, a government or a counterparty would dip its hands into, a sinking fund. So I think, the current administration will give that respect when it comes to, bond agreement. But then also you were asking of reforms as to what government is doing to ensure that there's a possible consistency or signal to the Eurobond market, that they are also prepared to pay, their coupons that are due after the debt restructuring. Yes, I can see, a lot of initiatives that are going on. You heard the Agric minister talking about, possibly giving 70% of market price of, cocoa to farmers. And for me, it's a good signal. One way or the other, give confidence in boosting export.
Right.
And so possibly looking at reorienting the economy from tax dependence. Already government has given the signal that they're going to scrap, some taxes. So giving that signal of reorienting the economy to ensure that there's more export in the cocoa sector and other, sectors of the economy. And one way or the other, we'll fill in the confidence, bring in the necessary, forex that we'll need to, service, external debt.
Okay, fortunate to have the Member of Parliament, Gideon Boako, who's aide to the former Vice President, also joining us via Zoom. Thank you, sir, for your time. So at least the announcement is out there. It's not the first time, but the bondholders are receiving this with some great news, expecting and hoping that this will be a good omen, bringing back the issue of investor confidence. For you, what do you make of the strategy, the broad plan by government to settle the DDEP coupons? Yes.
Well, thank you very much. I think, like you said, this is not the first time. And myself, I'm a bondholder. And I know the bondholders are used to these periodic payments as the coupons mature. If you remember, following the GDP program, government had special arrangements with, follow that restructuring, government had special arrangements with the domestic bondholders and then the Euro bondholders. And there are timelines that have been set aside for the payments to be made. Somewhere second quarter last year, government paid about 12 billion cedis to the domestic bondholders, and then later about $520 million. That was broken down to two tranches, 120 million, and then some 300+ million also to the Euro bond holders. In fact, before the previous government, led by President Akufo-Addo, handed over in January 7th, 2025, about $346 million was paid to the Eurobond holders upon the maturity of the coupons. The next DDEP coupon payment is what is due currently that the present government is paying, and I'm sure somewhere in July another coupon will mature. But it is important to establish that the payments that are occurring now are as a result of the buffers that were built into the sinking fund that was created by the previous government to ensure that at any point in time when the coupons mature, government to be able to have funds to pay. So it is important that government thought it wise to create that stream of cash flow into the sinking fund. And like Professor Mensah was saying, government is a continuum. And so at any point in time, in order to inspire confidence, inspire hope, and give some assurance to the bondholder, it is important that anytime the coupons mature, government to be able to redeem his obligation to the bondholders. And so we are happy,
perhaps this
and I think it's a good thing that this government is making payments as the coupons have matured. It's something that the government has done, and I think it has to continue.
Yeah, this has been by far the most controversial issue, the issue about the sinking fund itself and the architecture around it. Your tenure, you are accused of mismanaging it. That, at least that was the argument from the other side, the NDC. You feel that was a fair assessment?
When you say somebody has mismanaged funds, a fund that has been mismanaged, I don't think we'll be able to have the storage to make payments to date. So, those kind of political talks can be made by the politicians, but I'm not interested in that. What is important is that the government thought it wise to create a single fund to have a stream of cash flow into the single fund such that any time the coupons mature, there will be funds to pay. Today, some of the coupons have matured, and President Mahama, in ensuring that government is a continuity and government commitments stay put, is able to dip his hands into the sinking fund to make payments to the bondholders. If the sinking fund, in all fairness, was mismanaged, I don't think there will be any amount of money in the sinking fund today to redeem the obligation that government has. So, I don't want to wade myself into those kind of petty political talks.
Right.
What is important is that the sinking fund that was created by the previous government has been able to build some buffers, and those buffers are what we are using now by the current government to make the payment. But I must commend the government that is continuing to do the payments, because sometimes the tendencies will be there that politicians will find excuses and not to make the payments. So it is important that our bondholders, when their maturity is due, both domestic and foreign, we are able to pay. And so it's something that has to continue to inspire confidence. Once you're able to honor your debt obligations, you inspire confidence to the investor community, and people have trust in government, because we all know that government securities are supposed to be risk-free. And so if somebody makes investment in government securities and payment is due, and the payment is not
Gideon needs to qualify the risk. The risk-free will be different. You need to qualify the risk. If it default risk,
I understand.
Yeah, so
I understand that. I understand. So, I mean, that's a portfolio guy. He's
yes,
doing his portfolio
right. And Dr. Bako, one more issue before I bring everyone on, then we can wrap up. The point about the international reserves and what it could likely do in reducing the risk and the pressure on us while we look outward in dealing with the Eurobond market will be some of the interventions we've seen, for instance, from the likes of Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia. He's hedged much more around the use of our mineral resources, the gold for oil policy, for instance, which this government appears not to be interested in. A couple of days ago, speaking to the energy minister who was on here with us, he doesn't seem convinced about that arrangement. What form of alternatives do you feel that this government ought to focus on, Dr. Bako?
In fact, if you ask me, I will tell you that if I were in the shoes of government, I would say the greatest regret that I will have as somebody who has served in government is the fact that we did not discover the gold for oil and the gold for reserve idea in the early days of the government. It's a novel idea. It's something that is going to help. You remember a few weeks ago, the African Development Bank came with a policy advising member countries to back their currencies with gold. Look, had it not been for gold for oil, some of the gains we have made in the management of the economy today wouldn't have made that. I am not too sure that the current government intends to jettison the whole idea of gold for oil. You read some snappers of information here and there.
At least I can confirm that to you. The energy minister says it will be replaced. His words.
I am coming. So that is the point I'm trying to build. You know, sometimes politicians play to the gallery. They may say, oh, we're going to replace it, only for you to know that it's just a change of nomenclature. They just change the nomenclature, the name, but continue to do the same thing, because they themselves know. They know that indeed the gold for oil and the gold for reserve idea is something that is helping the country. But for political expediency, there may be one or two attacks on it, only for you to realize tomorrow that there's a change of name and go into the nitty-gritties of it. They are just implementing the same thing, mutatis mutandis.
Right.
So it is too early. It is too early. It's early days yet to conclude that based on one or two comments, they intend to jettison the whole thing. Let's see how the budget comes out.
Right.
Let's see how government rolls out its policies, and then we can see whether or not they intend to abandon the gold for. If indeed they want to do that, it is going to have serious fiscal impact on the finances and the management of the economy. We would want to see, we would want to see what the alternative will be. Of course, gold for oil, before it came, we were running the country. So I wouldn't say that if you abandon gold for oil, that means government business is going to come to a halt. But we want to see what the alternative will be. What are they going to suggest, and how potent that is going to be. We leave that to them to decide what they want to do next.
Right. Grateful for your time. We need to go. I'll give you the final words, Dr. Khalid, and then to Professor Lord Benson. Khalid, you first.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I'm eager for some correction to be made here. When Dr. Gideon Bako made reference to the fact that the sinking fund was a creation of the previous government, if he's referring to the previous government as in the Sektekpe-led finance ministry, or the previous government led by the care ministry. So I think that ought to be corrected, because the sinking fund was a creation of Sektekpe. I don't know what reference it was, but it was quite vague. So I needed to correct that.
I made reference to the sinking fund with respect to the accumulation into the sinking fund, the buffers. Okay, so the previous government, as I made, if specifically want me to talk about President Kufuor's government, it stayed consistent in the build-up into the sinking fund. That is exactly what I was talking about.
Okay. So glad that that has been clarified now. So I just wanted to be sure where we are on the same page. But moving forward, as I indicated, you'd see that conscious effort had been made. As you'd see, this was heralded in even the vetting of the Minister of Finance as to the commitment the government was making to the repayment of these domestic debt exchange programs, as you'd see, which is not a creation of the government, it's an inheritance which was grandfathered to the current government. And there's real commitment to actually ensure that that is done. So there's stability ahead of us. If you could see on the horizon, there is so much happening as far as financial discipline is concerned. We're looking at broadening the tax nest and also harnessing domestic revenue generation. So a lot of modernity is being brought here. A lot of ingenuity is being brought here. So the budget is going to be ready in March, and you'd see the road ahead. So there's real commitment, and there's resilience ahead of the economy, as I'll say. So the indications are there for all of us to see.
You seem to be hopeful, Professor Mensah. Are you also hopeful?
Very hopeful, not just hopeful, but very, very hopeful.
Yeah. So far, the government has given us, a posture of being conserved, which shows that it is ready to, service our debt as far as sacrificing some expenditures are concerned. And I believe that it will continue in that direction without it being a 9-day wonder, as the first few months of a government cannot be used to judge the long term. So from where I sit, I think they've given us a good signal, and let's hope it continues.
Great. We'll wait to see what happens in the coming days, but grateful to you, gentlemen. Professor Lord Mensah of the University of Ghana, to you, Dr. Khalid, at the Office of the Vice President, Dr. Gideon Boako, and also Dr. Edu Anani for all making us have a great show for tonight. I am Blessed Sugan. Log on to myjoyonline.com. You'll be seeing more reactions on this space, so stay on the Joy News channel. Bye-bye.